Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be doing a relatively large review and walkthrough of this game here, Raiders of the North Sea by Renegade Game Studios and Garp Hill Games. I say large because though this game is not overly complicated, it is actually a large-scale game. It's got a lot of bits to it, and it's going to take up a decent chunk of your table, and there's a good deal of rules to get through, though again, they're not complicated, there is a plethora of them. So, Raiders of the North Sea has players taking on the role of Viking warriors who are attempting to appease their tribe's chieftain by raiding local villages and by taking the plunder from those villages as well as their silver and making offerings to the chieftain, thus sort of gaining their favor. There are also some other ways to sort of drive your way towards victory. You can lose crew members to Valkyrie during raids, which not only kills your crew members but also gets you some victory points in the effort, since for Vikings, dying in combat is kind of a good thing. You can build up your crew's armor, which is seen as both beneficial for raiding, but also worth additional VP. And you can gain VP in general from performing raids and from making those same offerings to your chieftain. Getting into what comes in the box, because there are quite a few bits before we get into the actual setup and rules of the game. We've got a lot of nice small tactile wooden bits. You've got the three types of workers, which are black, gray, and white. You start the game with just black workers, but then you eventually start to obtain the gray workers, and towards the end of the game you will gain the white workers. Depending on the color worker that you use for the action you are attempting to make, there may be a benefit or there may be a detriment to using that color. And it's across the board. It's not just using the starting workers on the latter abilities is weaker, and it's not like using the workers that you gain later in the game, the white workers, necessarily makes the ability that you're taking better. In some cases it actually makes it worse. So they sort of shift the function of the abilities as the game goes on. You've got these lovely metal coins here that are used to represent the silver, the sort of currency that you have in the game for purchasing crew members, as well as taking some other actions. I like that these coins are actually metal, and I like that they truly represent Viking coins. I don't know anything about actual Viking runes, but I would say that these are a pretty close example of what they might have looked like. And I really do like that they're metal. Not enough games include actual metal coins. It's really cool. It really adds to the theme of the game. For a few more wooden bits, you've got your plunder here. Your plunder represents the livestock, iron, and gold that you can find when raiding various villages. You can also produce some in your village, depending on which action you take. And these, for the most part, are going to be used for sort of an in-village trading system, and again, for making offerings to your chieftain. You can also hold on to them for endgame VP, but we'll get into that when we get to scoring. We've got these wooden pieces here, sort of an odd-shaped square. These are used for tracking your victory points or your current standing on the three different trackers on the board. You have the general victory point tracker, which is yellow. You have the Valkyrie death tracker, which is black and tracks how many men you've lost to Valkyrie. And we have the armor tracker, which is red, and that represents the amount of armor that you've built up for your crew, which again can also gain you some additional victory points, just like the Valkyrie tracker. Then we have these little sort of brown sacks here. These are, it's not resources, but I can never remember the name, but it's basically resources. Provisions, that's what they're called. Those are necessary for a few things, but primarily you're going to need a certain number of provisions to go on any given raid. And generally, the number of provisions needed increases, as does the number of crew necessary, the farther up the map, the farther up the board you're attempting to raid. The earlier raids on the harbors are a lot simpler. They require fewer provisions and fewer crew. As you get towards the top and the highest raids, which are the fortresses, those require a larger crew and a larger number of provisions. You've also got this lovely black skull right here. This represents the Valkyrie and will be scattered throughout the raid locations on the board along with the plunder. And you have these two red die here. Now these might look like regular six-sided die, but they are not. They actually are missing the 1 and the 6, and instead, in the place of those two numbers, you have an additional 3 and an additional 4. So if you were to look at the 6 sides of these dice, you would have a 2, a 3, and another 3, a 4, and another 4, and a 5. What that essentially does is it increases the likelihood that you're going to roll a perfect middle number, an average number. So on a single die, you're likely to roll, mathematically, I believe, a 3.5, which is a strange thing to say on a die that can only roll whole numbers, but essentially you're likely to roll a 3 or a 4. A 2 or a 5 becomes extremely unlikely, and a 1 and a 6 is just impossible. On 2 dice, your odds of rolling a 7, which was already the likely average when rolling 2 6-sided die, is greatly increased because now you've doubled the number of sort of outputs that could roll a 7. So it just sort of spreads the average a bit to make the game a little more fair and consistent, I'm assuming. Looking at some of the, moving away from the sort of little bits that we have here and looking at some of the cards and tiles that we have a stack of Townsfolk cards. These are the cards that are going to become your crew when raiding. They have the actual Vikings on the back of them. You might have warriors, you might have berserkers, you might have jewelers, all different types of characters that are going to aid your crew in one way or another. Then you've got these tiles here. These are the actual offering tiles. There's a stack of these off the board, and there's only going to be 3 available at a time. Those are the offerings that you can choose to make to your chieftain by taking the offering action. They list on them both how many victory points you'll gain instantly from making the offering, but also what needs to be offered to the chieftain in order to take that tile. So it's not just taking the action, it's also paying the plunder or the silver or what have you that's necessary to make that specific offering. We've got these 4 cards here. They are separated by player color, so you've got yellow, green, red, and blue. And they just remind players of a few details of the game, how many victory points leftover plunder at the end of the game is worth, the max hand size, the max number of silver that you can have, your maximum crew size. And on the back, if you flip the card over, there's actually a nice little sort of lap marker. If, for example, you gain so many victory points during the game that you go all the way to the end of the victory track and pass 49 and hit 50 and then keep going, you can flip your little cheat card over and there's a 50 marked in the upper corner so that you can remind other players and yourself that you've actually already lapped the entire victory point track and are in fact now continuing around a second time. Last 2 things here, we've got the board itself. This is a lovely board. I really love the design of it. It's a high contrast, high saturation board. You've got lots of colors. You've got some nice art. And this lays out pretty much all of the functionality of the game. On the lower half, you have the village area. That's where you're going to place your workers into different buildings and take different actions in an effort to gain sort of the basics that you need to go raiding. You can gain some provisions, you can gain some basic plunder. You can't get some stuff, you can get some minor stuff. You can get some silver, and you can gain cards to your hand from the townsfolk pile, and you can purchase cards to put them into your crew, sort of buying your crew from the available cards in your hand. On the upper half, you've got all of the villages that you can raid, starting with the harbor, moving up to the outposts and the monasteries, and then up top to the fortresses. Once you start raiding, you're going to be doing a lot of back and forth. You go up and you raid, you come back down to the village for some more supplies. Okay, you've built up enough supplies, now you go up and raid again. So it's a lot of back and forth once you start raiding. The first couple turns of the game is just going to be village focused. You're going to be building up what you need. But then once you start raiding, it turns into this really cool balance back and forth. Like, all right, we're going out for war. Oh, we're back from war. Time to recoup. Oh, we're ready again. Going back out for war. So the way the map is divided into these 2 halves, I think really works for the overall feel of the game, the coming and going kind of system. I like it a lot. You're also going to have tons of pieces scattered all over this board at the start of the game that are slowly going to be peeled off the board as the game proceeds, because at the beginning of the game, all of the plunder and all of the Valkyrie that are available are going to be scattered across the various raiding positions or the various raiding locations, and as those locations are raided, that plunder and those Valkyries are going to be scooped off the board and taken control of by the player who performed the raid. Also, you're going to see some shifting workers. At the beginning of the game, the higher level workers, or the gray and white workers that are meant to be used for, some abilities in which they increase their functionality, are scattered across the various raid locations as well, and so you're going to see those getting swapped out with other workers as the raids are taken. I don't want to bog down too much in that. We'll get there when we get to the rules. Lastly, you can see the 3 trackers that are spread around the map. You've got, again, the red armor tracker, the black Valkyrie tracker, and the yellow straight victory point tracker. And there's lots of different numbers and icons spread across the board. I'll go over those when we get into the rules. Lastly, we have the rulebook itself. Now, as I've mentioned, this is not an overly complicated game. It might seem like there's a ton going on right now, and you have no idea how you're going to be able to follow this. Look at the rulebook. It's really only about 6, 7 pages long of rules that are easy to follow. I mean, the first 3 pages are basically boards set up and getting everything ready to start the game. Once you actually start to understand how the game works, it's fairly straightforward. There isn't too much that you have to memorize. The rules aren't this complex bog of, calculations and mathematics and counterattacks. There's nothing like that. It's relatively straightforward. It's basically a resource management and worker placement game. So, let's get into setup, and then we'll dive into the rules. So starting the game, you're obviously going to set the board up, you're going to put that in the middle of the table. You're going to give each player, I believe, 3 silver. You're going to deal each player 5 Townsfolk cards. They're going to choose 3 of those to keep and 2 to put back onto the bottom of the Townsfolk deck, so everybody's going to start with 3 available crew cards. You're going to shuffle up the offering tiles, and you're going to place those next to the board, and you're going to take the top 3 and lay them out onto the offering tile spaces on the board. You're going to give each player one of their sort of cheat sheet reminder cards that matches the color they've chosen to play as, and you're going to take the same colored, matching colored tiles for the 3 trackers on the board, and you're going to stack those all at 0, 1 for each player. So 1 on the armor track, 1 on the Valkyrie track, and 1 on the victory point track. You're also going to take the workers and place them on their starting locations on the board. The black workers are going to start on 3 of the buildings in your village, and the gray and white workers are going to be spread across the various raiding locations on the upper half of the board. It's really the upper 2/3 of the board. You're then going to, using your lovely velvet bag, you're going to take the Valkyries and the the plunders, so your livestock, your iron, and your gold, as well as your Valkyrie, and you're going to shake them up in that bag. And then looking out at the board, you're going to see on the upper left corner of each raid tile, or raid space, you're going to see a number in a green diamond shape, or a green shield shape. That's the number of tokens that you're going to pull out of the bag at random and place in that raid location. So you might see some 2s, some 3s, some 4s. So when you reach into the bag, you're going to pull out that number of random tokens, might be plunder, might be Valkyrie, and you're going to place them onto that raid location. So when that location is raided, that's what you're going to obtain. So obviously, plunder is good, Valkyrie are kind of good and bad, but that's a unique mechanic because that means that the raid location reward, you could call it, is going to change every time you play the game because you're constantly going to be shifting and randomizing what's available on each of the raid locations, which is pretty nice. And that also builds into how quickly the game can end, because one of the ways the game can end is once there are no Valkyrie left anywhere on any of the raid locations, the game immediately ends. So depending on where the Valkyrie are located, whether it be up in the higher, more difficult raids or down in the lower, easier raids, the game might actually end sooner than later off of that one end scenario. As I mentioned, you're going to be placing the workers on the raid locations. Those also are denoted in the upper right corner by the small colored worker symbol that will let you know whether or not it's black, gray, or white. And then you're going to take the 2 die that need to be rolled for some raids, for the latter raids in the game, and you're going to place those where all players can get their hands on them. So now you're ready to start the game. Each player is going to take one of the die and roll it, and you're going to start with the player who rolls the highest. Actually, I believe you use 2 die because there's only really 4 possible options on these 6-sided die specifically. But basically, you're rolling to see who goes first. There is no nifty mechanic like the last person to sail in a boat or the last person to raid a neighboring town. So once you know who's rolled the highest, that player is going to start. And it's a simple clockwise system. So starting with the first player, and here's the golden rule of the game. You're always going to begin your turn and end your turn with exactly 1 worker. Doesn't matter what color that worker is, doesn't matter what you do during your turn, doesn't matter if it's in the village, doesn't matter if it's a raid, you're always going to start with 1 worker and end with 1 worker. That's sort of the in and out mechanic of the game. So let's start with doing stuff in the village, or working as I believe it's called. In the village, you're going to see a series of buildings. Each of these buildings has a function that it can perform, sort of an ability. Some of them have alternatives, so one building might say that you can do, option A or option B. Some of them might be affected by the color of the worker that you place there. For example, if you place a black worker here, you gain 3 silver, but if you place a white worker here, you gain 2 silver. Some of them are actually going to have worker requirements that will specify exactly which type of worker can be used. For example, this specific location can only be used by a gray or a white worker. So depending on which action you want to take, you're going to take your starting worker, which is a black worker. Each player is going to start with a black worker, I forgot to mention that. And you're going to choose a location that does not have a worker at it currently, and you're going to place your worker there. you're then going to take the action that that building, that location, specifies, whether it be gain silver or draw some cards from the Townsfolk deck to add to your current hand of available crew, or hire a crew member by taking them out of your hand and placing them in front of you and paying the amount of silver that they cost into the bank. These are all options that you can take. Just make sure that you're placing your worker onto a valid location, so it either has to be, you can place any worker there, or you have to be placing the matching colored worker that space requires. Taking the action that location performs, choosing an option if it has an option, or making sure that you take the right action based off the color of worker that you placed there if it specifies a difference. And then you're done your first action, the first half of your turn. The second half of your turn is going to be that you're going to pick up a worker from a separate location. You can't pick up the worker from the same location that you just placed one at. So you essentially can't take the same you can't take the same action twice in the same turn. But you're going to pick up a worker from a separate building in the town. And in taking up that worker, you're then going to take the action from the building that you picked them up from. So you're going to get to take two separate actions. You're going to get to use two separate buildings in the town. One where you place a worker, and then once you're fully resolved that action, you're going to pick up a worker and take that action as well. Just remember, you can't pick up a worker that you had just placed down. It has to be two separate actions. Obviously, when picking up a worker, you don't have to worry about the type of worker that you're picking up matching the location that they're on, because they were already placed there by another player in a legitimate way. So when you pick up, simply choose the type of worker that you want to pick up and pick them up and take that action. Again, if there's an option, choose the option from listed next to the building. All of the buildings have great diagrams and symbols laid out next to them that explain exactly what that building does as far as an ability, so they're very easy to follow. Once you've picked up that second worker and resolved that second action, your turn is over, and we're going to move on to the next player. It's very straightforward. There's a little bit of intricacy as the game moves on, because you might need to start to think about, okay, if I pick up a gray worker, that means on my next turn I'm going to be placing a gray worker. So at the beginning of the game, because all of the workers are black, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to be placing a black worker and gaining a black worker. But as people start to raid, you're going to be bringing back from the raids gray workers and white workers, which will then sort of mix their way into the city, because you have to place a worker to pull a worker. And so if you raided and you pulled a white worker, at the beginning of your next turn, if you're going to go to the town, you're going to be placing that white worker into the town. And then because you can't pick up the same worker that you placed, you're going to be picking up a different one, which means another player is going to have access to that white worker. So you're going to start to sort of randomize, or not randomize, but you're going to have to start to decide which color worker you pick up from the town after placing your worker. And that's going to affect what you do on your next turn. Because if you pick up a worker on your previous turn that's not great at the action that you were going to take on your next turn, say for example if you were going to go to the silversmith and you picked up a gray worker on your previous turn, gray workers gain less money, I believe, than black workers, so they're actually less valuable. I could have that wrong, but basically, depending on the color of worker that you pick up, it's going to possibly affect what you can and can't do with them, or how successfully you can do something on your next turn. So that'll start to take effect as the game progresses, but at the beginning, all the workers are black. It keeps everything straightforward. So, again, your turn, place a worker, take the action. Pick up a different worker, take that action. That's the end of your turn. That's how things work in the village. That's how you're going to start the game for the first 3 or 4 rounds. You're going to be building up resources, gaining crew members, drawing new cards of crew members if you don't like the ones that you have, purchasing crew members from your hand and putting them into play in front of you so they're actually part of your raiding party. Let's take a quick look at the actual Townsfolk cards, the crew that you're going to be adding. They're pretty straightforward. You've got in the upper left corner, you've got their combat power. That's what you're going to use to start calculating your ability to raid. When you first start raiding, the raids are easy. You basically automatically succeed. Once you get to the more difficult raids, once you get past sort of the first round of raids, which is the harbor, you then have to start making actual combat checks to see whether or not you're successful at the raid. You're always going to gain plunder, but you might not gain victory points, or you might gain a bonus of victory points if you raid very well, and that has to do with how much combat power you can build up. So, in the upper left corner of your crew member's card, you'll see a red combat power number. That's how much they add to your combat for any raid that they are in. Below that, you're going to see a certain number of silver pieces. That's how much it costs to play them from your hand into play so that they are now part of your raiding crew. I will say that you actually also have to take the action in the town that allows you to purchase a card from your hand. If you want to get more cards in your hand, there's an action in the town that allows you to draw more cards from the Townsfolk deck. On the bottom of a crew member card, there are 2 separate options. On the left, you'll see a black card with a plus symbol on it. That means while this member is in your raiding party, you gain this benefit. It might be bonus victory points if you're raiding a certain type of location. It might be additional strength to your combat if you're raiding a certain type of location. It might be a discount that actually has nothing to do with raiding. Maybe it has to do with discounting further purchases of more crew members. That might be a thing. So you've got the sort of in-play ability, passive ability down in the bottom left corner. Then in the bottom right corner, you have the Town Hall ability. This is one of the buildings that exists in the town area. If you take that action, you can take a card from your hand. You don't have to pay its silver cost. You simply discard that card and immediately take the action in the lower right corner of that card. It might be for you to gain some resources. It might be for you to trade some resources with another. It might be for other players to donate resources, whether it be silver or plunder to you. But that's going to be an instant one-off action. You take the option from your town by placing a worker there or by picking a worker up from there. You discard the card from your hand and you take the action. So that's what you're going to get from your crew cards. Some additional combat after you pay the silver cost to put them into play. The in-play ability in the bottom left, or if you're using the Town Hall option, you can discard them for their bottom right Town Hall action. So that's your crew member cards right there. If you are ready to go raiding, if you've spent some time in the city and you're in the town and you've built up what you need for resources, whether it be your provisions or the number of crew cards that you need, which will be listed on the location that you're attempting to raid below the location. You'll see a number of black cards listed. That's how many crew you must have in play, and a number of provisions listed. Sometimes some additional resources or plunder as well, perhaps some additional gold on top of provisions. Once you meet that necessary amount of crew and of resources, you can raid that location. So, on your turn, if you want to raid, you're going to take your worker, and instead of placing them on a building in the town, you're going to place them on a raid location. And you're going to then confirm that you meet the needs to raid that location, the number of crew, and the number of resources. If it's one of the earlier raid locations, the harbors, there is no rolling of the dice, there is no comparing combat power, you don't calculate your armor. You're simply going to gain 1 victory point and the plunder that is on the location. You'll see that there is 1 victory point marked in gold or yellow. That is simply what you gain. Those are easy. As you move farther up to the more northward raid locations, and I don't believe there's anything in the rules that say that you have to raid bottom to top. If you want to jump the harbors and go right to the higher raid locations, you can, but they are more challenging, and getting there without using resources from the lower raid locations would likely be difficult. So, when you get to those harbor raid locations, you're simply going to take the plunder and gain 1 victory point. As you get to the higher raid locations, you're going to start to see sort of some options for what you can gain for victory points, and next to each of those is going to be a combat total. The combat total tells you which of the victory point gains you're going to get. So, looking at one of the more difficult raid locations, let's say the fortress towards the top, you can see that if you have at least 22 combat power total, you're going to gain 7 victory points. However, if you have 28 or more combat power, you're going to gain 9 victory points. And if you have 36 total combat or higher, you're going to gain 12 victory points. Now, the caveat there is if you end up having less than 22, which is the lowest number listed for combat total, you'll get no victory points. You'll still have raided the location, and you'll still gain the plunder, but you won't gain any victory points, which is sort of the main reason that you're going there. So the way that you calculate combat power is you're going to add up the total number of combat of the raiders in your crew, again, that number in the upper left corner. You're also going to add in 1 or 2 die, which you'll roll when you raid the location. The number of die that you'll roll is listed with the number of crew required and the number of resources required below the raid location. So you're going to roll those 2 die and add that to your total combat power. And then you're also going to add in any bonuses from your crew members listed in that lower left slot. That lets you know if you get any bonuses to strength for specific raid locations. And lastly, you're going to add in any bonuses from armor. Armor is something that can be obtained from the town. There is one location that allows you to add armor. You can either do it with silver or you can do it with iron. It's more effective if you do it with iron, but you need to get iron from plundering, so it's sort of a catch-22. Once you've done some raiding, you can start building better armor more efficiently. Up until then, you can do it with silver. The armor tracker is going to have a number. It starts at 0, and I believe it goes up to 9. And depending on where you are on the armor tracker, you also get to add that value to all of your raids. It doesn't get depleted from one raid to the next. So if you get yourself up to 5 armor, in all of your raids going forward, you're going to have a +5 to your overall combat. So that's pretty awesome. So again, total summation, you've got the combat power from each of your raiding crew members. You've got any additional bonuses from your raiding crew members for maybe the specific type of raid location that you're hitting. You've got the die, either 1 or 2 that you're going to roll based off the raid location, it'll tell you. And you've got any armor that you've built for your raids. That total is your combat total. And depending on what you have, you're going to gain anywhere between 0 and quite a few victory points. Depends on the raid location, and it depends on what you actually scored. Once you've figured out what you're getting for victory points and adjusted your victory point tracker, you're going to grab the plunder and you're going to resolve the Valkyrie. So for each Valkyrie skull on a location that you raid, these little black skulls, you're going to have to kill one of your crew members. Now this is sometimes a difficult choice, but sometimes it's not that hard because there are actually several types of raiders, raiding crew members, that sort of like to die. For example, the Gravedigger, if he dies during a raid, you actually gain a gold on top of him dying. So it's not necessarily bad for him to die. However, there are also some sort of limited edition heroes in the Townsfolk deck, and obviously if you can keep those alive, that's better for you. So you're going to assign your skulls to your raiders. So if, for example, you drew 2 skulls, you have to choose 2 of your raiding crew to die, and you're going to discard those raiding crew. Then you're also going to take those skulls and place them back into the velvet bag, because you don't actually need them to keep track of the men that died. Instead, you're going to move your tracker on the Valkyrie tracker. That's not only going to sort of keep track of how many people in your group have died, but if you look at the Valkyrie tracker, as well as the armor tracker for that matter, you'll notice that at certain points, certain increments going up the tracker, you gain additional victory points at the end of the game. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have your Vikings die during raids. You'll have to replace them, which is going to cost you some silver and some time to draw new cards, but at the end of the game, it's actually going to push you further towards victory. This is sort of how the game plays out. You go up and you raid, you go back to the town and you regroup and you get more resources and you hire a new crew, and then you go back up and you raid some more. Back and forth, around the table it goes. If at any point any of the 3 following conditions occur, the game immediately ends. So, at the top of the board you have fortresses. There are 6 raid locations that are fortresses. As soon as there is only 1 unraided fortress location left, the game ends. You don't have to raid it, so you don't wipe out all 6. But as soon as 5 have been done, leaving 1, the game ends. Or, if all Valkyrie have been removed from the board, and again, this comes back to where I said the Valkyrie are placed randomly, just like the plunder, so it may be that the Valkyrie are all placed on the lower locations. Maybe they're even all clustered up. The game might end sooner than later, because as soon as all of those Valkyrie are gone, the game ends. And sure, you could skip those locations and only raid the locations that don't have them to extend the game if you were not in the lead and you needed more time and victory points to pull ahead. But for the most part, you're sort of just going to raid whatever you can, because if you have the stuff needed for a raid, if you have the necessary provisions and you have the necessary crew, why not go for the raid, gain the loot, and gain the victory points? So as soon as all Valkyrie are gone from the board, the game ends. And lastly, if the offering stack, that's the tiles that you make offerings to the chieftain with that gain you additional VP, if the offering stack and all 3 tiles on the board are gone, so there are no offerings left, the game ends. So any of those 3 conditions and the game's going to end. You're going to tally up where you are on the victory point tracker, plus any bonus victory points from your Valkyrie tracker, plus any bonus victory points from your armor tracker, and lastly, any victory points gained from leftover plunder that you still have sitting in front of you. So each gold is worth 1 victory point, each iron is worth 1 victory point, and each pair, so each 2 livestock, is worth 1 victory point. You're also going to remember to factor in any victory points from the offering tiles that you've acquired throughout the game. And that's it. Whoever has the most wins. In the case of a tie, the victory actually goes to whoever has. I can't recall. This actually happened in our last game. Whoever has the most Valkyrie points, I believe, because Valkyrie is men that have died in honorable battle, and that's better when you're a Viking. So in the case of a tie, whoever has more Valkyrie points wins the game. And I'm assuming if there's still a tie at that point, it's a tie. So that's Raiders of the North Sea. It's really straightforward once you get going. Play actually moves very quickly around the table because your turn isn't all that complicated. If you're going to do work in the town, you're going to place a worker, take that action, pick up a different worker, do that action, and you're done. The whole thing takes less than a minute, and you're on to the next player. Sometimes there's some thinking involved in trying to determine what it is you want to do, how to do it most efficiently, and maybe what kind of worker you're going to be picking up as far as the color of that worker, but it's never really that complicated. And if you're going to be raiding, likely it's something that you've been planning for 2 or 3 turns, trying to gain the resources necessary and get the crew together that you need. So by the time it actually gets to the turn where you're ready to raid, there's not a lot of thinking about it. You've got the whole thing set up. You place your worker, you take the plunder, you roll your dice to figure out whether or not you're going to gain some victory points, and if so, how many you're going to gain, adding in your armor and your crew and all of that. And then you pick up the worker from that location that was already on that location, not the one you placed, but the one that was on that location at the start of the game, and that's your new worker. And then you're done. So just like working in the town, raiding takes about a minute to get through the whole process, and then you move right along. So the game moves very steadily around the table. As far as actual intricacy and sort of technicality, you can really bog yourself down in trying to think things out, how to be super efficient, how to get the most bang for your buck as far as your silver goes, and whether or not it's worth it to go for offerings versus ratings. Do you need to draw cards right now, or can you make it a couple turns? Is this guy worth putting into your crew, or should you go to the town hall and disclose him, or disperse of him for your for his special ability? There's some thinking that goes into it, some decision making, but for the most part, it's put down a worker, pick up a worker, do some stuff in the middle, your turn's over. It's not a long game. It takes about an hour to get through it, even if you're doing it with 4 players, assuming everybody knows what they're doing. We took about 2 hours for our teaching game with 4 players, and that includes setup time and going over the rules. So really not that bad. I really like this game. I really like that one of the nifty things about this game is it's actually part of a small universe of games. So here we have Raiders of the North Sea, right? But there is also Shipwrights of the North Sea and Explorers of the North Sea. And to explain how those work, Raiders of the North Sea is pretty localized, right? You have your tribe and you're raiding nearby villages. There isn't a grand scale of navigation and travel inside of the game. You're kind of going next door, robbing a dude, and coming back. So it's pretty local. It's kind of a neighborhood, right? When you move on to Shipwrights of the North Sea, things expand a little bit. Now you're building boats. You're preparing to sort of spread out a bit more, travel a bit more, journey a little farther. So the actual expanse of the setting grows a little bit. Now it's not your neighborhood. Now it's kind of your whole town, your whole city. I say that in a sort of confusing way because we're moving through multiple towns in this game, but you get what I'm saying. The scale expands a bit. And then when you get to Explorers of the North Sea, the scale expands even farther. You're moving from nation to nation and region to region. You're moving great distances to deal war and go into conflict and plunder and things like that. So the 3 games are in the same setting and they sort of just expand the scale of how big the game you're playing is, which I think is great. And what's even better than that is that there is a 4th sort of option in which how you can play the games sets them into a bit of a, I guess you could call it a campaign. It's called Rune Saga, and it basically allows you to play the 3 games in succession and sort of create this almost mini tournament campaign of playing through the games. On top of that, there are individual expansions for each game within the set. So there are expansions for Raiders, there are expansions for Shipwrights and Explorers, I believe. And that's just the North Sea set. Renegade Games has also come out with, I believe it's the West Kingdom instead of the North Sea. So you have Architects of the Western Kingdom, you have Visigoths of the Western Kingdom, you have Knights of the West, or Paladins of the Western Kingdom. So they're setting that up. And that's more of a medieval European style setup as opposed to the northern Scandinavian Vikings. I think it'd be really cool if they kept going with this and they did like Empires of the East, and they could do like samurai and the various Eastern Asian cultures, and then they could do one in the South that could be like a Northern African, almost like an Egyptian Mesopotamian region type thing, and then hell, go one beyond that and figure out a way to have all 4 different sort of mini verses clash against each other in the middle, so you could have battles between the North and the West and the South and the East. Like, it would be really cool if they just kept going with this. I hope they do. But as far as Raiders of the North Sea goes, I really like this game. My entire group really likes this game. It's a simple to learn, sort of difficult to master with a fair bit of complexity if you feel like going into it type of game. It's a nice mix of resource management and worker placement. It has a visually grand scale without feeling like you have no idea what the hell is going on while you're playing it. It runs around the table very smoothly. I really like it. It's really good. Lots of fiddly bits, lots of nice wooden pieces and metal pieces and plastic dice and lots of cards and tiles, and the board is beautiful. I really have nothing to complain about. I like this game a lot. I plan on picking up, if not some of the expansions for it. I'm definitely going to pick up Shipwrights and Explorers and Tome Saga, because I think that's really cool. And then I'm probably going to start moving into Western Kingdom and pick those games up as well, because I really like how this works. And if the rest of it works in a similar way, I'm sure I'm going to like that too. So anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. I hope if you get a chance, you give this game a try. If you want to pick it up from your local game store and give it a run through, let me know how it goes. I bet you'll enjoy it. I'd love to hear from you. If you haven't yet, please go down below and click on subscribe and set your notification bell to all so you get notified whenever I post one of these videos. Right now, I am trying to post on Tuesday evenings. This video is likely going to come out on a Thursday. I apologize for that. I am a father of a 1.5-year-old. My wife is a very busy worker. I also have a full-time job and a contract job that I do on some evenings. I try to make these videos. I have my professional photography career. There's a lot going on. And so if I'm ever late on these videos, I apologize, and I'll always try to make it up within that same week. I just can't do what other YouTubers do and get like a sort of a backlog of videos ready to go. I tried to do that at one point and it just didn't work, and the quality of the videos went down. So I don't like to do that anymore. Also, as you can see, I sort of shifted my studio around. This is not how my studio was set up as far as my last video goes and for the few videos prior to that. I really liked how those videos looked, but it made it so that the only thing I could do efficiently in my office was film that video and nothing else. So now I can actually film B-roll, I can film these videos, I can stream, I can work on my desk, I have my miniatures here on my shelf next to me, I have my games right behind me, everything's easy and accessible. I'm just trying to really up the efficiency so that I can do things better and faster and more on time for you guys. So yeah, subscribe if you can, set your notification bell to all. Leave a comment down below if you want, we can chat. I like talking to you guys. Leave a like or a dislike based off of however you enjoyed the video. And I will see you in the next one. Have a good night.